Hi, everyone. So, Merry Christmas and, well, almost Happy New Year. We are here with Dr. James Schaller. This is Band-Aid Lyme hosting another interview session with Dr. James Schaller on two very important topics. The first one we're going to start with is depression. And there's a lot to say about that, and we're going to cover some important points that Dr. Schaller is writing about in one of his new books. And we are very happy to have Dr. Schaller today with us to expand on some of these very important points and give you a little taste of his book. So, Dr. Schaller, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Valerie, always wonderful to see you, my friend.
Happy holidays.
Yes, they were quite wonderful.
Yeah, well, that's nice. It's cold up here in Boston.
Cold, what's that?
I guess cold is subjective, but to me, anything below 70 is chilly. So, all right, Dr. Schaller. So we're going to talk about depression. Now, this isn't necessarily a positive topic, but there can be positive outcomes with the right approaches. So that is the takeaway that we're going to eventually take away, but we're going to get through some of the discussion first on this matter. So in regards to depression, just generally speaking, Dr. Schaller, how prevalent is major depression in the United States or and beyond? Like, what do you have to say about that off the bat?
Well, it's in all cultures in the world, and certainly 20% of women, 10% of men. It's one of the highest and most powerful things that affect women's health. About 20 million a year in the United States get it. So it's not a casual thing. It's a major medical issue, but expect full and complete cure. That's why I wrote the book, because I'm seeing why some people are not having full and complete cure. And they can go to this thing when it's out soon, but we're going to give some ideas now to get things started.
So this book is coming out rather soon. Is that correct, Dr. Schaller?
I would think by the end of January, early February. I already edited it. All the notes are there, and a few more people are cleaning it up, and it'll go to the producer in probably a week.
Okay.
And it'll be free off my website, personalconsult.com. It'll be $5 above cost, paperback. The Kindle will probably be $5.
Wonderful. That's very exciting. Thank you for doing that for all of us. Thank you.
My honor.
So does Lyme, you are a Lyme literate doctor, you're a Lyme specialist, you've been treating patients for over 25 years. Now, does Lyme
29.
29, does Lyme disease and co-infections, also known as tick-borne infections, make it more likely to have depression and experience depression?
Absolutely. I think one casual friend of mine, Robert Bransfield in New Jersey, has written quite a number of articles showing that Lyme has major impact, both psychologically, psychiatrically, and neurologically. And he's not the only one. There's quite a lot of information if you just go look for it. I still do subscribe to some psychiatry journals and things. I think I've seen one article in 31 years. So if you're just going by the regular information education streams, you may not know it at all. You may not realize it's such a big deal. And then certainly Bartonella, I wrote an article, which to my surprise is still the most current article on depression, panic, and anxiety caused by Bartonella. And they were successfully treated with azithromycin, and they all recovered.
Wow. That's
And
very
I think Babesia can also do it, but
mm,
less than those other two.
mm. So there's definitely a relationship there. And
Absolutely.
I would call it a correlation.
The
That's a good
readers may
side
not
tip.
realize we had a big debate on this word correlation. I have no idea what she means by it, and she loves the word.
I always see relationships or, one thing might cause another or have some type of relationship um for a direct cause of one thing to another. So I always use the term correlation in a variety of situations. So that's what I mean by correlation, dear audience. Okay. So your book, you have noted that you have 55 ways to cure depression. We won't enumerate them all here, but your
Mhm.
book is quite extensive in discussing these various options for patients. And
Well,
and
because we're in a Twitter world, it's lean and mean. I think it's 60 pages text. So every page is a bullet, and this is why you need to be aware of this. Okay, that doesn't fit you. Next page. There's nobody with depression that isn't going to find 10 things in there that relate to them. And I promise them, there's only like one in thousands of psychiatrists that know this stuff in this book. I've just been in the right place at the right times to be around smarter doctors than me, that I've accumulated this. And I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about it.
well, that's really wonderful. I mean, I know a lot of people will be very happy to have this information because I myself have seen firsthand how Lyme and co-infections, tick-borne infections, cause depression. So that sort of leads me to the next topic. Um, what does depression look like? And if you are meeting a patient, what do they report and what do you see?
That's a very good question. I'm going to give a couple samples. And if you don't feel like it's thorough enough, just put major depression symptoms, and you'll get a couple other samples. Usually, what I see is uh, they're not enjoying things that they normally like. Now, kids can be suicidal and still like playing video games, so that one doesn't count. But you enjoy tennis, you enjoy gardening, and you enjoy talking to your friends, whatever. And you can take it or leave it, and more often leave it. Uh, you sleep more or you sleep less.
Hmm.
You're sad or irritable. I tend to see irritability more with Lyme and Bartonella, and we've discussed that in a previous talk. And it's hard to think. So the tick infections make it hard to think. And then you add depression to that, and then it's a bit worse. Uh, they may feel restless when a year
Yeah,
ago they weren't restless.
yeah.
And true anxiety disorders, unless you've had trauma, they should be there when you're younger. So the fact that it started when you're 30 or 40 or 50, that's a flag that something's changed.
Hmm.
And one of the changes may be these infections we're talking about, but it also may be that now you have major depression.
And I've often wondered, with what I've seen in patients who have been diagnosed with tick-borne infections, a relationship between body images and low self-esteem. Sometimes they're related and sometimes they're not, but body images that some maybe even weight issues or weight concerns or image concerns, things like this, and low self-esteem based on something that's maybe not necessarily really based on much of anything, but something in their own mind. Have you seen this type of thing in your practice?
Yeah, I think one of the things that hit me when I was younger, uh, I was about 7, and the kids I was hanging out with were about 10 or 11, and were a bit sociopathic. So
Mm,
they beat the living daylights out of me for reasons I'll never understand. But and I remember going home and being by myself. I was too ashamed to tell my family or my parents, who I considered winners, that I wasn't a winner right now. And I remember crying. And then I felt like a presence in the room. I didn't see anything, but I just had the sense that somebody was in the corner of the room with me.
mm,
And over decades, I came to feel that was God.
wow. Well, that
So I
that
do feel if we're rooted, if we have a foundation in God, and my particular preference after reading all the world scriptures is I like Christianity quite a bit. If you raise from the dead, you get my vote. But if anybody else does that, I'll consider them. And so I think that anchors us, if that's something you might consider in this coming year, to have a stronger identity other than my hair's falling out, I've gained 20 pounds. I look in the mirror and I'm like, what happened to me? What happened? You know, I'm in my 60s. I look in the mirror once in a while. I'm like, are you kidding me? I thought I was 25 last week. No, not so much.
it goes fast, doesn't it, Dr. Schaller?
It sure does.
I'm right behind you. A,
Yep.
a little ways, but not too far. But I agree with the God comment. There's a lot to be said about that. I actually was a seminarian. Interestingly enough, it wasn't until truly through my Lyme disease experience in the last 5, 6 years that I came to know God in a way that I never imagined I ever would. And that was actually having led me to my deathbed. And then it was laying in the hospital beds or wherever I traveled for emergency care that I actually came face to face with God. And I know for sure there is another reality beyond this one. So I hope that gives the audience hope. There are a lot of different theological approaches to understanding God, but the nutshell version is that Jesus did not have a denomination. He came for all people of the world, no matter race or color, and no matter what your experiences are in life. So that's my 2 cents.
Exactly. And you can speak with authority because you're one of the few people that came so close to dying repeatedly and came back from that. So you have a certain authority that many people do not have.
That's thank you for mentioning that because sometimes I have to remind myself, thank you, God, for saving my life. A lot of people were praying for me, and um, I feel very blessed and that I'm here for a reason. I think we're all here for a reason. I've met other people, unfortunately, who did not survive Lyme disease, and that has made me sad. And I know that there are people out there who will be watching this program who may be on their deathbed as I was. And just know that God is real. there is a reality beyond this, and there is hope, and this is not the end. So just know that. But right now, we're going to continue on with our depression topic, because we want to still offer the audience hope that there is hope beyond being in a depressive state.
Let
So,
me jump in and throw out a few ideas that are just samples. I met an old Scottish depression expert, and I was trained in a facility where you could sit down with like top world experts and have a taco and just talk to them about serious stuff. It was amazing.
wow.
Although I picked it, so it wasn't a surprise. So I'm sitting across from George Simpson, who all these doctors and other people are flying in to see. Little did I know that was going to start happening to me. But I said, Dr. Simpson, what is the secret? He says, you're not going to believe me. I said, no, what really? What is it? The dosing wasn't high enough and it
Mm.
wasn't tried long enough.
Oh,
So one of the things that I see a lot of is you have well-intentioned, smart family doctors, internists, OBGYNs who prescribe antidepressants, and they give doses that are impotent. They don't really do much. Maybe they do for some of their patients, but not mine. Let me give you a couple examples.
yes.
You're not on Wellbutrin 450, bupropion. You've never tried Wellbutrin. Now, I'm not saying you rush to 450, but you don't consider it a failure till you get there. Oh, and then you check the blood level, because some people can go even higher because they're rapid metabolizers. And venlafaxine or Effexor, I'm kind of shocked that people are getting like 300 milligrams. I've always gone at least to 450. I had it literally before the pharmacist did. And so, and again, you check the blood level, and so there's drugs like Lexapro, where if you go to 40, the pharmacist is like, what are you doing? You're a crazy person. And I say, well, I am a crazy person. That's true. But I really know this drug. I've written a few articles on it, and 20 milligrams as the top. Are you kidding? That's not funny. Or citalopram or Celexa. I'm not going to tell you how far I go, but it's certainly above 80. And the family doctor may say, wait a minute, that's kind of reckless. And I'm like, you know what? Speaking as someone that never had major depression, I had it my second year of med school. I would get up early and pray, and I'm sitting there and I'm crying for days after days. There wasn't a particular reason. It was challenging, yes. So I talked to a psychiatry buddy, and he said, James, you want to try something. Let me write you something. So I got it, and 7 days later, I was peachy. I was happy. I was
Wow.
myself.
Wow.
Now, is that the norm? No, it's not. But that was 35 years ago, and I'm still on that medication.
Wow.
Because all major antidepressants are made so you can swallow the whole bottle. They assume you're going to try and commit suicide with it. These are very safe. And I have read all the authors that are anti-psychiatry. And that's very useful in a free society, so that people can ask themselves, do I really want to try this? Or Do I want to keep taking it after 2 years? I'm feeling better. My mother died, but after 2 years, I feel back to myself. Maybe I can come off it. Why stay on it? And that's a good point. So that would be a sample. Another issue that you've kind of alluded to, there's only a very small number of psychiatrists in North America that if you ask them, could you test me for Bartonella, that they would have a clue what you're talking about. I have some friends that are big players and they're grant reviewers and they publish much more than me. They publish with me. They don't even put it on their CV because there's already 400 things there. I mention this and tell them why it's serious, and it just goes right over their head. Do they trust me? They do. It just isn't part of their wheelhouse. So I think that if somebody suspects it might be them, and on my website, personalconsult.com, there's a checklist book that includes symptoms of Bartonella. And look at that. And if you think maybe you do, you might want to run down a Lyme Literate MD, LLMD, and I recommend going to Lyme, what is it? LymeDisease.org, right? Yeah, LymeDisease.org. They have a nice grouping of very good doctors, and you may have to drive a half an hour, even an hour, but isn't that better than waiting an hour in a waiting room and then being told something that's 80 years behind reality?
Or told that you're crazy, it's all in your head. These are the famous slogans that they use. So
One
that's
of the things I do, and it's relevant to depression, is there is about 250 medical causes of depression. We've only mentioned a couple. When I do my labs, I'm not kidding. It's 25 tubes every 2 weeks. So it's about 75 labs. If the lab techs think you're going to do that in one sitting, which you can't do, they have a panic attack, freak out, call their supervisor, and that's why we're only doing 25 at a time. I never have found anybody that was always normal in all those areas. So this thing about the yearly exam, which is fine, and 4 tubes of blood, are you kidding? Now, maybe they're being good in that they're preserving medical resources. But if you have major depression, your suicide rate is 15%, plus or minus whatever. That's an emergency. If you had a medical disease and they said your death rate is 15%, they wouldn't have you sitting 2 hours in the waiting room.
right.
They'd be moving, and they'd
Right.
be running every test they need to run. Unfortunately, inflammation and every hormone and infections and cytokines and all kinds of things impact mood. And that's why we get all those labs, because we do find things.
Right.
We always find things.
Right. So there are many factors, especially when we're looking at a tick-borne infection patient who's been exposed to all of these bacterias, viruses, etc. So the cytokine response causes inflammation, general inflammation from the bacterias themselves burrowing their way into different various regions of the body. So there's all sorts of factors.
Now, one thing that's come up is everybody agrees that inflammation is not really a good thing. And I was at a conference with infection doctors a few months ago, and I was overhearing them talking about they do interleukin or interferon labs. Those are just inflammatory labs. Forget about the techie stuff.
Right.
And they say they're always useless. And I turned around and I said, yes, they've been useless for 29 years. But there are two labs that aren't useless. And all of a sudden, people are picking up their pens. And I got this from the best immunologist in my opinion in Colorado. And a doctor sent me his results, and I'm looking at his labs, and I'm freaking out because what I expected from the sick doctor was high inflammatory markers, but on the big labs, they were always normal and worthless. So, National Jewish Health,
Okay.
the lab, and this will be in the book, the lab is TH1/TH2 panel A. And the doctors always go in the menu and say, oh, well, it's right here and it's there. No, it's not. No, it's not. You have to contact them because it's a hidden option they offer. The other one, and it's less than $300. That's amazing.
Well, that's what's
And
neat in the Lyme world, because we know how expensive other things can be. So that's well worth the money.
you're going to get like 10 results that have a lot of research showing if you're abnormal, it matters. It really matters. And then the other one is Radiance Labs. And I have some patients doing that, and I'm using them. And they have about 14 cytokines that they propose. My appeal would be try to ask your Lyme literate doctor. Your regular doctor is probably not going to want to do it unless you do a really great sales job. Is just tell them, look, it's under 300 or it's 450 for maybe the Radiance one. And why don't we get something objective to see how much gasoline is in my veins? And over a few months, they may do it. I mean, a lot of the people in the Lyme world, they're very curious. They read like crazy. They're very aggressive doctors, and they're constantly learning. They're not average doctors. They're
Right.
really the cream.
Right. I agree with that. The one problem is we need more of them. So we do have to encourage, and I keep saying this in every interview, we have to encourage the younger generation of practitioners to please go into tick-borne infection diagnoses, studies, and there are several organizations out there that are willing to train you. ILADS, Invisible International, even Dr. Schaller can give you some pointers. Dr. Horowitz, there's several doctors out there who are already doing the work and have valuable information to share to pass the
Now,
torch.
the only thing I'd say about Richie Horowitz is when push comes to shove, I think I have a better profile than he does. I think when you look at my bone structure and my hair, and I think Richie, he's trying to get so much in his brain out. I've got to listen to it about 5 times, but I always enjoy it. But I have to listen to it 5 times because it's so good. I love the freaking guy.
I
I
think
freaking love him.
I think he and I have something in common. We talk fast and put a lot of information into one sentence, but well,
But
hey.
Richie has never used the word correlation, so he's on
Oh,
my
well,
good side.
I'm sure it's in his toolbox. We're gonna have to We'll have to brief him on the term. So, so Dr. Schaller, so chemical changes in the body of depressed people, you've sort of alluded to this because these things can be picked up on some of these blood tests you've already mentioned, but the fact of the matter is, just to firmly state, there are very real chemical changes in the in people who have this depression state.
Yes, definitely. And there's just so many studies, and I list maybe the bottom line in about 1 minute in the book, so people don't have to be bored out of their minds. But for example, if a child of suicidal parents is adopted by very happy non-suicidal parents, the risk of suicide is closer to the real parents than the
Mm,
adopted parents. And if you remove tryptophan from a diet, and that's kind of a sneaky thing to do, but they pulled it off. They gave two groups a diet, and one didn't have that building block for serotonin,
mm,
and they tended to get depressed out of proportion.
mm.
And there is so much information like that. Now, the only thing to be careful about is we're not entirely sure if it's serotonin or some downstream domino thing happening inside cells. And that's being explored and investigated more every decade. The stuff I learned is already way obsolete, and they're really advancing. They're getting better. But there are antidepressants that are not strictly serotonin antidepressants that can be very effective.
Mm.
One that I would suggest to our listeners, if you've tried multiple antidepressants, and I mean at the high full doses, not the silly PDF doses or PDR doses, I would ask your psychiatrist if they can put you on an MAO inhibitor.
Mm.
Now, methylene blue is an MAO inhibitor, but I don't think it's strong enough
Hmm.
to help significant depression. And that will mean you have to watch some foods. You don't have to become a monk eating bread and water, and you can't have certain drugs like Demerol. That would be dangerous. But I've had so many patients that nothing would help them, and then they did an MAO inhibitor and they were back. They weren't back 60%.
Mm.
They were back.
Wow. That's very significant. A-
Yes.
And these were Lyme and tick-borne infection patients specifically?
Some were and some weren't.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Very good to know. So I'm looking at some of our outline for our questions here. So if treatment is started based on some of the things you've noted, and we have some other questions later on, but if treatment is started, how fast can one expect improvement?
Uh, Great question. And it's kind of the question I get from every person with Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella. When will I be back to myself? And every time I guess, I'm wrong. If I think it's going to be 6 months, it's 2 years. If I think it's going to be 2 years, it's 9 months. But I think you tend to start these medicines low, particularly if somebody's sensitive or has mast cell activation syndrome and prone to allergies and already a little bit nervous. But you don't stay low. You keep moving steadily, and then you max it out. And then you ask yourself, has there been any improvement? If there's 30% improvement, I don't remove that drug. because let's say the next one gives you 20% improvement. Okay, you're halfway home. You're halfway cured and back to yourself.
Right.
And that can take place pretty fast. Uh, maybe in 6 weeks, 8 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
But if you're only seeing someone once a month for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you can't do that kind of speed.
Right, 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 right. Okay, so that's very positive. That's very positive good news. Um, okay. So we have a couple notes here on sleep and depression. Anything to say
Yeah,
on
the
that?
thing about sleep, uh, trouble sleeping is kind of an emergency. It
Hmm,
is an inflammatory gasoline house fire. You can't be sleeping 5 hours or 4 hours a night and be healthy in any way, physically, fighting infections, your hormones, your immune system, your mood. It's just not happening. So it's like pain. If somebody's in pain, I address it. If somebody can't sleep, I address it immediately. I don't say, in a few months, we'll get back to the sleep. Oh, no, they're not leaving the office until we've got a couple sleep options. Try
right.
one, you don't like it. You've got two from another one from the pharmacy. You don't like that one, there's a third. And usually that works. One of them works, and then on to the next issue.
So sleep is
But poor
hugely
sleep
important.
increases depression. And if
Mm,
you recall, I never told you this. I was the king of crammers. I mean, this test would start, I'd be in the men's room studying, and a half an hour has gone by, and I'm like, I don't need that time. I'd walk in, the first questions were ones I just crammed. I'd nail the test. But the bad part about that, even though it's kind of funny and silly, is I would tend to get a cold that day.
mm,
And I'm not the only one, probably. And that's just an example of the immune system is not working very well with poor sleep,
right.
nor is the mood well with poor sleep. And if you have Bartonella and Lyme, they're going to tend to move a little more slowly, but move a little more with routine poor sleep and make insomnia even worse.
Mm, I well, I've experienced that myself, so I know that to be true for a fact.
Mhm.
Um, so let's move on to stimulant use of or overuse of stimulants, either food stimulants like coffee or stimulants such as nicotine or stimulants such as an over use of our own exertion of our own cortisol levels from exercise or stress or trauma. Something to say about that? And
Those are
depression?
four separate issues. I think with nicotine, the only issue that I'm concerned about particularly is if you're taking it in the form of cigarettes, that's 200 carcinogens. And I try to get those people on a patch right away. I didn't say this, but uh, people can smoke on a patch. But what I've noticed is instead of smoking 2 packs, they smoke 5.
Mm,
Okay, is that a success? Uh, it's moving in that direction. Now, one thing I'm not up on is this whole vaping thing and the science of that, the controversy of that, the risk of that. I just haven't studied it recently, so I'm not up on that. Uh, I'm kind of pro exercise. Many people feel, many doctors feel, if they could give you one medicine, it would be exercise. My only concern is that you're not doing it in such a way as to damage joints. And I've had many athletes, and the number of operations on their body, in the knee and the shoulder and the other shoulder, and I mean, it's unbelievable. So I think there's sports, and that's great. And then I think, you are putting yourself at risk for that particular sport. And that's a value judgment I can't make. They have to make that themselves.
Right, right. Well,
Now,
that,
in terms of coffee, uh, some feel that it may be as good as tea. Uh, my feeling is I think they both have some positive elements, but if you're drinking, and this happens at times, if you're drinking 10 cups of coffee a day, you may want to explore why you're drinking 12 cups of coffee a day.
mhm,
Uh, I'll personally buy you a case of water if you want to try that after 2 cups. So I think that's worth exploring. In
right.
terms of stimulants, ADHD has many different causes, including tick infections like Lyme, etc. And some people that end up being bipolar and manic start looking like they have ADHD, and they're sort of hyperactive, etc. I had a 16-year-old who had been my patient for 5 years, and his parents had ADHD. And so I did put him on a stimulant because there was research out showing that there were less injuries and less fractures and less car accidents when they were on stimulants. So the one day this fine young man forgot his stimulant, his mother was running after him literally down the street, and he had an accident a block from the house. And he
Mhm.
was a reasonable driver. He was ADHD, uncontrolled.
Yeah, well, so I'll just make a quick note about my own experience with ADHD. My family, most of my family members are ADHD, perhaps not professionally diagnosed, but it's obvious that they are. Um, and I read a lot about being ADHD in law school. It wasn't until law school. I always knew I was a little different. And it took me hours and hours as a young person in grade school, middle school. I was put in the slow reading group, ironically, and just, but I knew that I was not intelligent. It's just I I translated information differently in my mind. People with ADHD, it's not that they can't focus, it's that they focus on many things simultaneously. So while I'm doing one thing, I'm thinking about my list at Trader Joe's, I'm thinking about the laundry I have to do, I'm thinking about this, that, and another thing. So when I was in law school, I was forced to sit down and sit still for 14 hours a day, perhaps. And I had to sit there and read, gosh, 20, 30 cases, 40 cases a day, and take notes on these cases and actually try to memorize some of the information because I'd be called on in class the next day. And when I realized that there was something odd about my behavior sitting still, and I'd start looking out of the window or picking my belly button fuzz or running off to the kitchen to get something to eat and going here, going there, the bathroom, you know, I thought, gosh, this is odd. This is odd behavior. But it took me until my 30s to realize that and kind of make the connection. So when I actually started researching ADHD, I found a lot of interesting information. There's a political commentator, his name is Tom Hartman, and he did a lot of research and study on this. And his son, in fact, was diagnosed with ADHD. And he his his conclusion with his all his scientific research was that it's a gene. And he traced it back to hunter, he kind of makes this relationship between hunter people and farmer types, hunter versus farmer type. So I would be a hunter type. Um, but people who are hunter types are constantly aware of their surroundings 360 degrees, and sometimes they will just automatically dismiss information that they don't deem as critically important to their existence. That's why they miss details, because their mind just automatically dismisses the information and they hold on to the key nuggets of important information for just mere survival. So
Mhm.
anyway, that's just a side note. And I learned that about myself in law school. And just another quick note, I actually did um, try Adderall in law school, but the problem was I was under profound stress. I mean, just day in and day out, just gosh, for maybe 6 years or something. I was going through a lot of harsh life events. I was alone where I was living for years, and without really a family support system or strong friend support system. I was actually quite depressed. I was crying a lot, just from the stress and the stress of the grades and et cetera, et cetera. And then I was drinking coffee, gosh, a pot a day. So here I was on multiple forms of stimulants. I was using up a lot of my cortisol from being under so much stress and trauma, perhaps. And then I was going to the gym, and I was actually addicted to exercise. I used to teach kickbox cardio. So I
Mhm.
was using all these resources. I was very, very thin at the time, and I probably had leaky gut, and I was a sugar addict, lots of sugar, just bad diet, bad sleep habits, all of the above. And in fact, what happened is that I actually physically collapsed on the floor of my apartment where I was living during my law school years. And I had to drop out of law school for about
Mhm.
8 months to return and lie on my mother's couch for about 8 months while I went back to law school for another semester, went right back into the stressful situation, the same patterns. And again, I collapsed again, and I had to take another 8 months off. So this whole overuse of stimulants is a very serious matter. And I had to learn the very hard way all about it. And the further research I did, and I'll just make a quick note of this, is that
Mhm.
John F. Kennedy Jr., JFK, he
Sure.
he had extreme trauma, and sorry, not Junior, JFK. He had extreme trauma during the war, during the time he served in the war, when his boat was, I think it was hit with a bomb or something, and all of his comrades jumped off the boat, and he was one of the only survivors. And this extreme trauma and shock he had really used up a lot of his cortisol. But at the time, they didn't know a lot about he slipped into Addison's disease. So it's adrenal fatigue, but if you go too far down the line there, it slips into Addison. So they were pumping him up with artificial like cortisol and all these things, but it really wasn't doing him any good. His body could have recovered the gasoline tank, but they were pumping him up with all of these things, and unfortunately it didn't do his health very well, but he was made able to make it and perform decently as a president, of course, but
Mhm.
it's a very real matter, and I did
There's
experience
two
it.
issues there. One is kind of the PTSD of that kind of trauma. And
Right,
it's very exciting, the advances by psychologists and psychiatrists and other researchers on metabolizing trauma. We are so far ahead than 20 years ago.
right.
And Addison's is very recognized. And, you just don't go crazy with uh, the steroids. But like I have a patient, if she vomits and doesn't give herself a steroid injection, she's risking death,
Mm.
and we'll have to do it again in a half an hour. So it's a very dangerous condition, especially if the person doesn't know how to give themselves a needle. And I prescribed her a number that are all over her house, her car, her purse, and it saved her life about 4 months ago.
Yeah,
So, but I think where things are at with many of the progressive physicians is if there is a need for hydrocortisone or something of that ilk. Okay, but the least amount required, you just don't throw a dose pack at everybody with a little flaky rash. And, I remember Louis Afrin, who's one of the godfathers of mast cell activation syndrome. I was reading one of his notes on patients we share, and he regards prednisone as, sometimes a necessary evil, but he doesn't like it, doesn't feel comfortable with it at all. And his first question is, how fast can we get you off it?
Right. I mean, I know from personal experience before my bout with tick-borne infections a few years ago here, but I know that the body can in fact heal from adrenal fatigue. And um, I had to research that. I actually I did a video thing online with a very big doctor out of Loma Linda, California, who specializes in adrenal fatigue. So there are resources out there, and it's diet related, rest, a lot of rest, and just positive influences in your life. Laughing is healthy. It's actually healthy medicine. But actually to take a break from these very intense stresses in life, and life can in fact be very, very stressful. And Lyme, of course, can make it even more stressful for
Absolutely.
a
In
variety
law
of
school,
factors.
I mean, it's brutal.
Oh gosh.
It's no joke.
Dr. Schaller, I don't think I'd ever want to do it again. My first degree, my first master's, I did the Master of Divinity. I call that law school for God. And then I did the regular law school eventually. And whew, we'll just leave it at that. That they were pretty intense degrees, but I'm thankful I was able to do them, but those were not easy journeys. And
No.
so but anyhow, back to our depression topic. So basically we know that depression can lead to substance abuse like alcoholism or drug addiction as well. Is that correct, Dr. Schaller?
Yes, uh substance abuse promotes depression, and depression can make you want to look for comfort in a bottle or a drug. And so it has to be approached with care,
It's a vicious
carefully.
cycle if not addressed properly.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay. So a couple more notes here because there's so much great information. Gut health and depression. How important is keeping the gut healthy?
Well, I've been promoting probiotics for 31 years, uh, partly from my dad's mentoring, who was a physician. And when I had patients try to cut them down, or, well, I can save a little money, I'll just forget about them for 2 months. And then I'd sort of feel like something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what was wrong. And I'd go over their meds list and whatever. And I don't put people on 100 supplements. Nobody goes into a doctor's office with a bag of 100 things. I don't do that, but I do very targeted and very meaningful interventions, and the patient understands exactly why they're bothering to take this stupid extra pill.
Right.
And I've never had anybody get C. difficile, which is like you have diarrhea 20 times a day, and that's in the gut normally. But if you don't have good probiotics, it can just take over. And while I've successfully have helped people with that who blew off my probiotic recommendations, uh, that's not something I want to do anymore.
Right.
So another thing that's coming out in the research on when you take stool and you analyze it with DNA, you start to find a pattern. And if you look at families, you start to find similar patterns among the family. But one who may be the sickest one clearly has a different pattern. And what has surprised me is, and I'm pro probiotics and gut microbiome, I'm really pro all that stuff. But even I was surprised that when you transplant, let's say, some stool from the mother to a very troubled, depressed child with very abnormal bacteria, the child gets better.
Wow.
And to me, that's shocking. That's really wild.
I actually have heard of those types of procedures now being performed in other countries. So I know that that's happening. That's very
And in
powerful.
America, you have to get an FDA. I believe it's a humanitarian exception or something that they don't approve it, but because it's so severe, we'll let you go once. And then when you want to do it a month from now for somebody else, apply again. So it's a lot of paperwork. It's very annoying. Many physicians who would like to do it are kind of not sure if they really want to spend 50 hours in paperwork doing it for each patient they do it for.
You know, what's interesting here in Boston, I saw a billboard ad on the side of a bus that said something like, "Would you like to sell your POOP?" So someone's banking on this, Dr. Schaller. They've realized the value.
There is literally a book that is SHIT, and I'm not a cursing kind of guy, but she actually does those transplants.
Wow.
And I bought the book. I just haven't had a chance to read it. But if somebody's interested, you might want to take a look at that. I just wouldn't hold the cover around the neighborhood in a conservative neighborhood.
Well, God bless her.
Exactly.
Everybody has a role out there.
That's right.
Okay, so kind of segueing off of this topic, the American diet is, we know that the American diet is notoriously filled with sugar. Like, it's sugar everywhere. You can't even avoid it. It's just in everything we eat. It's processed. It's, well, not even to mention the GMOs content. But so what about sugar, Dr. Schaller? What does it do to the body in relation to depression?
Well, I would say it's the same thing that gasoline does if you spray it in your bedroom, your kitchen, and your living room. Sugar is pure gasoline. It's pure fire in the veins. It does nothing good. It's only bad. And I have on my Facebook, I probably posted it maybe May of this year. But if you put sugar, expert, doctor, you could probably access it yourself. It was a really well done talk. And I think one of the things I believe it was an endocrinologist showed, was that the amount of sugar that we consume is absolutely outrageously increased from like 100 years ago. I don't know how many fold difference, I just can't remember, but it was massive, really big.
Right.
And so I think, enjoying berry fruits and certainly vegetables and nuts. And, I think there's other people that have written more about this, but I know myself years ago, I'm gaining weight. So I just ate once a day and I only ate good stuff. So meat and vegetable, and
Right.
that's it.
Yeah.
every day.
So pastas, potatoes for the audience, pastas, potatoes, cereals, breads, all these carbohydrates. Rice is a big, another big one. It's all sugar. So these are things, especially people with tick-borne infections must look out for. And
I would, the middle ground I would say is make it an exception. And the other thing is, you may have two rolls at dinner and start feeling 2 or 3 hours later, you got a headache. Wait a minute, I never have headaches. So you may notice it yourself, but I don't want to say you have to be a purist, but it should be the exception, not the rule. How would any of us be doing economically if every day was Christmas and we had to buy presents for all of our loved ones, friends, and neighbors? We'd all be living homeless. So you can't have these substances every day. You
right,
really shouldn't have them every week. But if once a month you want to have a couple slices of pizza, okay, but that's the exception.
right. Don't make it the norm, basically.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
So fast food, pizza, all of these
Hmm.
things must be very, very cautiously approached.
Hmm.
So moving on, because we want to cover a few more points before we wrap on this discussion. Mold toxins and depression. What are mold toxins, Dr. Schaller?
Well, I made a really good decision. I don't know if it's 15 years ago. I read a book by Richie Shoemaker, Desperation Medicine, and I thought he had some really great ideas about these toxins that were organic. I just thought it could have been clearer. So I made that point to him and I said, I'll try to make you clear and you try to teach me the science that you have in this book. Well, the book ended up being Mold Warriors and kind of promoted mold in a more public way into medicine. And then I wrote two more books on mold after that. Simply, the body is designed to remove a little bit of toxins made by molds.
Mm-hmm.
That's not foreign to humans, but the problem becomes, let's say you have a roof leak and water's coming down in one of the bedrooms and it kind of dries, but not totally. And you try to mop it up and then it happens again a week later. Well, now all of a sudden you may be looking at a situation where the amount of mold and the chemicals that are irritating or toxic to you, and there's so many classes, it's not worth us talking about.
Right, right,
But like ethnicities, there's a lot of types of these noxious chemicals. Your body can't keep up with all your breathing or sometimes all your eating. So, and that definitely can promote depression.
right, right, right. So, okay, so we've touched on mold toxins, weather and depression, sunlight. A point on that, perhaps.
Well, I was very amused to look at my grandmother's diary some years back, and she always started her diary with, today is gray and overcast. There's no sun. And then on another day, she'd write, the sun is very bright. It's a cheery day. And
Mm,
so the bottom line on this is that it is absolutely certain that, particularly in northern parts of North America, when the lux energy, which is a single candle, so in the summer, it might be 10,000 lux. In the spring, it might be 1,000 lux. And in the winter, I don't know what it is, but it's not good.
Mm,
So I used to have a Sunbox from, I believe, the Sunbox company, and no, I don't make anything from them, but I had some of their products, and I would turn on this 10,000 watt Sunbox in the summer. You couldn't even tell it was on because the sunlight was so powerful, but our eyes can't pick it up. But in the winter, when I turned that box on, it was like something out of ET. I was waiting for the police to come to shoot the alien invaders with all these bright lights.
wow.
You could see that light from like 100 yards away in my office. So it's definitely a fact. It's not new psychiatry. It's very respected and well proven. So I think the thing I would ask yourself is, as the seasons start to get darker and you move into fall and certainly winter and early spring, are you eating more? Are you more sluggish?
Right,
Are you a little more tired? Is your emotions a little more flat? Well, why be that way?
right, right. I do have one of those light boxes, by the way,
Mhm.
given that I'm in Boston, so I have to, it's in my closet. I think I should probably pull it out. It's been
Oh yeah. Oh
20
yeah.
years. When I was in the seminary, I was like a monk in the library and I needed sunlight sometimes, but I agree, it does help for sure. So moving along, we did mention exercise, I believe, before, and that is healthy and helpful to relieve symptoms of depression as well, and probably get the juices flowing and even detoxing, I'm assuming. And you also discussed drugs for depression in your book. Maybe we don't have to go through all of them, but you do note them and you do mention various options for people like ketamine, lithium, natural SAM-E, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be very helpful for people to
Yeah, I
understand.
had a patent on a transdermal CME, and CME is an amazing thing. It helps your joints, which may be relevant to Lyme patients
Mhm.
and also Bartonella patients, and it protects the liver. You make 3,000 milligrams a day, but adding maybe another 800 to 2,000 milligrams may
Wow.
help your mood, may help your detox, uh, and help your joints. The only thing about it, some people mess up, CME consumes B vitamins.
Oh,
So if
okay.
you're doing 800 or more, you should be taking 2 B complex. If you're doing 2,000, you should be taking 3,
Mm,
because you want some lumber for the fire, so it actually does something useful. You're not throwing your money away. I believe there's a brand called Trove, something like that, on Amazon. It's remarkably cheaper than most SAMe, and my patients have done very well on it.
okay, that's good to know. That's helpful.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have another point here, mast cell activation, and how is it related to depression?
Well, I forget who said it at a recent conference, but 85, but it wasn't me. 85% of patients with tick-borne infections have some degree of mast cell activation syndrome. And if you consider yourself sensitive to anything, smells, perfumes, food, whatever, I would take the time to put mast cell triggers, mast cell symptoms, and mast cell treatments, just so you know what may be going on with you. And there's a debate about how common it is, but I think a rough guesstimate is 10% of the population. Well, that's a massive number of people.
Right.
And so this is not a rare thing, and it does cause depression. So let's say you're eating something guy in the Midwest I'm working with, and all the GI doctors are giving him all these drugs. I checked his mast cell, he's through the roof. So he eats corn or he eats dairy and he gets diarrhea,
Mm,
and that was it. That's
yeah.
the cause of it all.
Wow.
So, uh, so mast cell activation syndrome, when these immune cells, these mast cells, which are right underneath the skin and line the intestinal tract and they're in the brain, they have 1,000 chemicals. I call them poisons to kill infections that are coming at you. Well, you don't want those poisons being released without you really needing them, because they can make you feel very depressed and
Right,
very miserable.
right. Well, that's certainly informative. Well, I
Mhm.
think we've covered most of our, well, or if not all of our main points here on depression and in relation to tick-borne infections or otherwise. And
Now, what I would just appeal to people about, we covered about 10 pages of this 55-page text. Don't dream that we covered it all. So if you have depression, what, $5, $10 for a paperback? Please go to my website. It's free. Please look at it. Don't don't miss out on some more pearls that may actually help you, your friends, your relatives, etc.
and that's www.personalconsult.com for
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Schaller's website. And
And already there's about 15 free books there.
oh, that's right. That's really wonderful, Dr. Schaller. Thank you for sharing all of that.
You're
So we
welcome.
are going to move on to another discussion in just a few minutes. So we are going to wrap on this discussion. And I just thank you, Dr. Schaller, for again, for this really helpful information on depression. It certainly speaks to many, just thousands and thousands of people out there who are suffering with it, tick-borne infection or otherwise. So we thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. It's always so much fun to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaller.